very good evening to all meditators. This evening, I shall discuss the importance of mindfulness of mental states, or the mind, or the consciousness. In the practice of mindfulness meditation, mindful and noting of the states of the mind or various mental processes is the first important factors to make progress. The second important factors is to develop constant mindfulness, and we have to practice the mindfulness of daily activities well, in order to ensure that there is constant mindfulness. When mindfulness meditators can practice mindfulness of daily activities well, then they would also gain better results in sitting meditation and walking meditation. Sometimes the mindfulness is not strong. The mind could be quite restless. In other words, there will be many thinkings, thoughts, or other mental states arising one after another. This is the nature of untrained mind, or the mind that is not yet well trained or well developed. So when there's a lot of thoughts or thinking arising, meditators should not feel frustrated or disappointed with the practice. Mindfulness meditators should have the right attitude, thinking that there's a good opportunity for me to realize the true nature of the thought process or the thinking mind. So meditators should be mindful and note every thought process as it really occurs. Meditators should also be very mindful and note other mental states, such as unhappy or frustration, or sometimes there is a slight mental defilement arising, or such as anger, and so on. Sometimes meditators realize that there's a thinking. That thinking could disappear immediately. It's because two different mental states cannot arise at the same moment. When the previous one had disappeared, then the present one would arise. But when the mindfulness is not yet sharp and precise, then the thinking mind may not disappear immediately. It seems like the thinking mind keeps going. Then meditators have to make mental labeling, for example, thinking. At the same moment, be mindful of the thinking mind. If meditators be aware of the noting mind or the mental labeling, then the thinking would have disappeared. But the meditators did not realize the disappearance of the thinking rightly, because the meditators pay attention to the labeling. So when meditators pay attention to labeling, the thinking disappears. So that mindfulness is not a precise mindfulness. So meditators need to develop precise mindfulness in order to realize the disappearance of the thinking mind or any mental states. And when the mindfulness becoming sharper, meditators will be able to perceive the arising of the thinking mind or any mental states at that moment of arising. If the mindfulness getting sharper, meditators would realize or would be able to sense that the mind is about to think of something. If the meditators could mindful of it precisely, then that mental process also subject to passing away instantly. Here, meditators have to be careful that they do not suppress the mind. Or suppress the mind means they do not allow the thinking to arise. So suppressing the state of mind, or the mind is about to think of something, if meditators put an effort to suppress it, then this is not the way of mindfulness meditation. So meditators have to be mindful of that state of mind, or the mind is about to think of something as it duly occurs. So in other words, when meditators are mindful of any thoughts process, thinking mind, or any mental states, they should not have the idea to get rid of it or to cut off the thinking. Sometimes a thought process, for example, a memory causes another mental state to arising. For example, aversion or dislike. The meditators should be mindful of that aversion or dislike immediately. So meditators should train the mindfulness or to be mindfulness in order to be mindful of every mental state as it duly occurs. If meditators put forth enough effort to note every mental state, then the mental state would become less and less. Meditators also realize that every mental state has the nature of arising and passing away. Then mindfulness becoming sharper and concentration also becoming deeper. If meditators do not mindful of the mental state well, then they may have the idea that I'm thinking of something, or my past memory arising again. So actually, any mental state is a process of the mind, is a natural process of the mind. So mindfulness meditators have to take every mental state as an object of Vipassana meditation. When the mindfulness is not sharp, meditators do realize or sense the contents, or it means the attention has gone to the contents of the thoughts. So meditators need to mindful and note continuously, thinking, until the thinking disappears by itself. So at the beginning of my practice, meditators could perceive the state of mind well. The state of mind consists of two parts. One part is the mind or citta, the other is the cetasika. It's usually translated in the English as mental concomitants or mental associates. So this cetasika color the mind, or we say color the mind. For example, if there's anger, then you note anger, or when the craving becomes more dominant, so we say this is a craving mind. So you have to note craving. So meditators may not able to mindful of the mind or the consciousness at the beginning of practice precisely. So as you know, during the practice of mindfulness meditation, meditators are mindful of nama rupa, or in other words, the five aggregates. As you know, the five aggregates are aggregates of physicality, or rupa khanda, or the aggregates of feeling or sensation, or vedana khanda, or the aggregate of perceptions, sanya khanda, or the aggregates of mental formation, sankhara khanda, and the aggregate of consciousness, vijnana khanda. So we begin the meditation, mindfulness meditation, by being mindful of the physicality or rupa. So rupa consists of four material elements. As you know, the wind element or the fire element, earth element, and water elements. And then sometimes painful sensation arising, then you have to mindful of that painful sensation as it really occurs. Then sometimes there are other mental formations that consist of 50 cetasika, for example, restless or feeling sleepy, and so on. So mindful of the mental hindrances is very important. For example, when meditators feel sleepy or sluggish or drowsy and so on, if meditators could not overcome these hindrances by mindfulness, then it's difficult to be mindful of other phenomena clearly. Sometimes restlessness can be caused by analytical mind. If there's a tendency to analyze the object or to analyze the experience, eventually that would lead to the restlessness of the mind. Then the fifth aggregate, consciousness. Consciousness here refers to the six consciousness, of hearing consciousness, seeing consciousness, hearing consciousness, or smelling consciousness, or tasting consciousness, body consciousness, the mind consciousness. If the mindfulness is not sharp enough, then it's difficult to mindful and note the consciousness as it really occurs. To be able to note hearing as hearing, seeing as seeing, and so on, meditators have to attain a higher stage of experiences or knowledge. When the mindfulness is not sharp, meditators who perceive or become aware what sound, or for example the sound of bird, or the sound of the clock, and so on. In other words, the mind has gone to the external object at that time. Meditators could not perceive the consciousness of hearing at that moment. So if meditators could not realize the consciousness clearly, then they could not make further progress. So if one could not realize the true nature of consciousness well, or the true nature of the mind well, wrong view still can arise. So in other words, one who does not understand the teaching well and does not have experience in Vipassana meditation may think that vijnana, consciousness, is like a self, a soul that is taught by other teachings. So some who do not understand the teaching well may have the idea or thinking that when a person had passed away, the consciousness or the mind will leave the body and transmigrates into another body. Sometimes some may think that the consciousness or the mind will be hanging around like a soul somewhere for 7 days or 49 days, then only take birth again in another body. So this is known as Antarabhava in Pali. So do you believe in Antarabhava? But as you know, whatever arising, it was subject to instant passing away. So because of passing away of one thing, then it can condition the arising of another thing. So during the time of the Buddha, there was a monk by the name of Sati. So Sati also had this wrong view or depraved view. So it's because of this view he accumulated a lot of demerits. So he was thinking that this is the Dharma taught by the Blessed One, the Buddha. So he was thinking that the same consciousness that runs and wanders through the round of rebirth, or not another. So he was thinking this is the teachings of the Buddha, or taught by the Buddha. So he was thinking that when a being or a person has passed away, then the aggregates of physicality, rupa khanda, or the aggregates of feeling, or vedana khanda, the aggregates of perception, sanya khanda, and the aggregates of mental formation, sankara khanda, also cease. Cease means pass away, not pass away together with the death of a person or being. So he thought that the consciousness will not cease, but pass on, move on to next body or to next existence. According to the commentaries, because he had been studying about the past life of the Buddha as a bodhisattva. He was thinking that the past life of the Buddha as a bodhisattva, or such as Vesantara or Mahajanaka and so on. When bodhisattva passed away, the four aggregates also cease with the passing away, but the consciousness will move on to next life. So when other monks found that he had this wrong view and advise him to not to have this wrong view. But he was very adamant. Adamant means something like stubborn, not willing to change. So sometimes when a person holds a wrong view, others may advise him or her, correcting her. One may not able to change, but hold on to that wrong view. So similarly, Sati was not willing to let go of this wrong view. He hold on to it tightly. So other monks have to report the matters to the Buddha. So Buddha called him and asked him, what is that consciousness that you were talking or saying about it? So Sati answered, it is that which speaks and feels and experiences here and there the result of good and bad actions. In other words, he wrongly identified the consciousness as a self or soul, in other words, as a atta. So he had the wrong idea that the self is the agent of an actions, and this self also going to experience or feel the results of that actions. So this self may be taking birth here and there, but retain the same identity. So this self is permanent or not subject to change. So this is known as DT or wrong view. So do you think that there's a self that migrates or transmigrates from one existence to next existence? So if you believe that there's a self or soul, then some teachers say that you are outside the teachings of the Buddha. So if you have confidence in the teaching of Buddha, then you should develop the right view, that there's no permanent self, or no permanent entity, or there's no permanent soul. You have to realize that everything arising is due to conditions. In other words, without causal conditions, nothing can arise. So how does consciousness, for example, hearing consciousness arise? How does this consciousness of hearing arising? So the most important, there's a sound. Then there's a ear sensitivity or ear sensitivity. Other texts also include the conditions of the space. It means sound, there's a space for the sound to travel to the ear, and once endowed with ear sensitivity. So when all these conditions met, then consciousness will be arising. So this consciousness is given the name as a hearing consciousness or sota vijnana in accordance with the conditions of arising. So as a mindfulness meditators, which object you should be mindful of? The sound or the ear, or which object that you should be mindful of? But in accordance with the practice of mindfulness meditation, consciousness of hearing should be the objects of mindfulness. Because that consciousness is an internal object that you can perceive it directly, or in other words, you can know it through your direct experience. Sound or the noise is the external object, so we cannot take external object as the object of mindfulness meditation or as an object of Vipassana meditation. It's because we want to gain direct experience in order to realize the true nature of phenomena, for example, anicca, dukkha, anatta. In other words, what we're practicing here is direct Vipassana. So when meditators mindful of hearing precisely, that mindfulness of hearing also includes the sound or the noise. So if meditators mindfulness is very sharp, then they would realize hearing as hearing. You may heard about a famous sutta given by the Buddha to Venerable Bahiya, where the Buddha give the teachings to Venerable Bahiya, or be mindful, be aware of seeing as he seeing, or hearing as hearing, and so on. But if the mindfulness and concentration are not yet strong enough, and meditators have not yet gained enough experience, it's difficult to mindful of hearing as hearing, seeing as seeing. But when meditators could realize the specific characteristics and the common characteristics of the mental and physical phenomena better and better, then they may be able to mindful and note the consciousness of hearing, conscious seeing, conscious smelling, and so on, very precisely. So when meditators realize these two characteristics very well, at the times the mindfulness always realizing the Paramatha Satya clearly, or the Paramatha Satya clearly. So in other words, mindfulness meditators are no longer perceiving the form or the shape. Meditators only seeing the Sabhava Lakkhana clearly. And meditators seeing the dissolutions of the phenomena very clearly. So the dissolution of phenomena means meditators, for example, realizing the dissolutions of the movements as movements. So for example, sometimes meditators perceive there's a movements, there's only movements there. Then it seems like that movement is dissolving, and then disappear. In other words, that movement will not continue to the next process. When the meditators mindfulness is not strong, meditators may perceive the process movements, for example, lifting. Meditators realize there's a process of lifting movements. Then, if the mindfulness is getting sharper and the concentration also getting deeper, meditators may begin to see more and more processes of lifting movements. For example, meditators realize there's a process of lifting movements, then as if continue do another process, lifting movements. Then there's another continuations of another process of lifting movements. But when the mindfulness is very sharp, when meditators perceive there's a process of lifting, seems like that movements like dissolving at the same at the place where it arises. Then after dissolving of that process, lifting process, then only appear another lifting process. That lifting process also seems like dissolving away, like become blur, then there's no more. So in other words, meditators realize the dissolutions of that movement. So meditators realize that the movements which is an object of mindfulness meditation, that object is arising and passing away at the very same place. That object would not move to another process or to another place. But when the mindfulness is not strong, meditators may think the object could be moving from one place to another place. So one of the examples is the pain. Sometimes meditators mindful the pain, they experience the pain is moving from one place to another place. So actually, there is no object moving from one place to another place. So at that stage of experience, meditators will be able to mindful and note hearing as hearing. Sometimes you may also experience, you may have this experience for a short time, or when the mindfulness and concentration are very strong. But when meditators begins to think of the experience, when meditators begin to think of the experience or becomes curious about the experience, then the mindfulness will drop or decline or decrease. So in that way, that good experience also will be gone. In other words, will not be able to sustain it. So in other words, the experience of meditations also could be fluctuating. Or fluctuating means going up, then suddenly go down, and so on. But meditators could sustain the experience. Then, when the experience lasts longer, then they would progress to higher and higher stage of experiences. So when meditators note hearing consciousness very precisely, then what will happen to that hearing consciousness? So what happened to that hearing consciousness? So it will disappear immediately. So when that consciousness had disappeared, do you think that consciousness will arise again when there's a condition? You think that consciousness will arise again when there's a condition? Then you have not yet realized impermanent thoroughly. So it's not so easy to see the three characteristics thoroughly. So when that sota vijnana consciousness, before the arising of this sota vijnana, hearing consciousness, where was this consciousness? Where was this consciousness? Does it appear somewhere, or where was this consciousness? Actually, it doesn't exist before it appears. Then why does it appear? Why does it arise? Because of the conditions. So everything arising to the conditions. So in this sutta or discourse, the Buddha explains about these six consciousness. So when that hearing consciousness had disappeared, if in the next moment the smell comes into contact with the nose, then what will be arising? The smelling consciousness. So it is smelling consciousness. Is the previous consciousness was the previous consciousness, or is another consciousness? Is another new consciousness? So in other words, the Buddha explained that even between the consciousness from one sense door to another sense door, there's no transmigrations of consciousness from one sense door to another sense door. So can we say that there's a consciousness transmigrates from one existence to next existence? So that's why we say that the teachings of transmigrations or reincarnation is not the teachings of the Buddha. What the Buddha taught about rebirth is different from transmigrations or reincarnations. So the sutta also explained with a simile, just as fire is reckoned by the particular condition, depending on which it burns, then the fire is named in accordance with that condition. So just like when the fire burns dependent on the grass, then it's reckoned as grass fire. If the fire burns dependent on wood, then it's reckoned as a wood fire, and so on. So similarly, the consciousness is reckoned or giving the name in accordance with the conditions. So this name is a concept of paññatti. So concept of paññatti gives the impression everlasting, or when the thing had disappeared, it may appear again. So at the beginning of the practice, meditators could not go beyond the concept of paññatti immediately. But when the mindfulness and concentration are getting better, then the mindfulness will incline towards the ultimate reality. So at the time, the mindfulness is not interested in the concept, but would experience the Paramattha Satya, or the Paramattha Dhamma. So at the beginning of practice, you perceive or becoming aware that the body is moving, then you could be mindful and note the movements. So in other words, the body move first, then you can be mindful and know it. You sense that the abdomen is moving, then you can mindful and know it. But when the mindfulness is getting more and more attentive and precise, then the mindfulness would experience the movements clearer and clearer. At the beginning of practice, meditators may not able to mindful and note right at the beginning of the process. They may mindful and know it a bit late, or the movements have been going for a short distance, then they realize there's movements. But with constant effort, then they may be able to note the movements right at the beginning. So meditators perceive there's a process movements, a process movements after another process, and so on. Then, when the mindfulness is getting sharper, meditators could be perceiving the arising of the intention as a natural process. So, in other words, meditators realize there's an intention, then a process of movements would be arising. So, in other words, meditators realize the specific characteristics of the sabhava lakkhana of the wind element. There's movements, and these movements is preceded by the intention. So this mental state of intention is also a natural process. When mindfulness is sharp with a deeper concentration, meditators perceive it naturally. If meditators could not perceive the intention clearly, then it's better not to make any mental labeling. For example, sometimes meditators could not perceive the intention, yet they make a mental labeling, intending, or sometimes they label 2-3 times intending, note lifting, and so on. If meditators did not perceive the mental state of intention, yet they make labeling, it's not so good in the practice. So eventually, that mental labeling becomes habitual. The meditators take that habitual labeling as an intention. So then, in that way, meditators did not really practice truthfully. Because in the practice of mindfulness meditation, we have to be mindful of something that's arising truly at that time. We cannot mindful of something that we did not see it or did not perceive it. We do not mindful or develop mindfulness based on preconceived idea or preconceptions. For example, we all understand that all movements are preceded by intention, but during the actual practice, if we could not perceive the intention, then we cannot be mindful and label intending. Similarly, sometimes you may think that this feeling of like or dislike, you may have this feeling of like or dislike, but most important is not based on your past experience or your preconceptions. When you are not meditating or practicing mindfulness meditation, this feeling of like or dislike, when your eyes see something, can arise. But if you can be mindful of seeing well, for example, during retreat, seeing, if there's an intention to be mindful intention. When there's a stretching movements, you're mindful not stretching, and so on. Then this feeling of like or dislike cannot arise when you are able to mindful of the phenomena well. Similarly, sometimes the mind think of certain matters and cause some defilements to arise. When you're able to mindful note thinking well, then the defilements would not arise anymore. So that's why Abhidhamma explains the manifestation of mindfulness as mindfulness is manifested as a mental state, protecting the mind, protecting the mind from being attacked by the defilements of kilesa, and also mindfulness manifested as a state of mind turning towards the object. So in other words, meditators have to face with the object instead of directing the mindfulness or attention to somewhere else. So during the practice of mindfulness meditation, sometimes meditators experience a lot of mental states. They should be patient with all these mental states. So when mindfulness meditators are able to mindful of this mental state well, then they can expect progress in the meditations. But if they do not put enough effort to mindful and note the mental states, then they will not make progress. They may be overpowered by the mental states, especially the mental defilements. So which meditators, whenever they encounter restlessness or any mental hindrances, they would develop patience and perseverance, so that they could overcome all these mental states and make more and more progress in the practice of mindfulness meditation.
สาธุ สาธุ สาธุ